Welcome back to Top Tens. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today we're talking about 10 common and stubborn misconceptions surrounding World War II. Today's script was provided by Gregory Myers, so if he's provided socials, they'll be linked alongside my own. And if you disagree with Mr. Myers at any point, feel free to rant about it in the comments. With that said, let's go ahead and get to it. World War II is the largest scale war in history, at least in any modern sense, and has filled our imaginations to the bursting point. Countless documentaries, movies, video games, books, and pretty much everything else under the sun has been made regarding World War II, and it has become truly larger than life. However, like many larger-than-life things, legend and fact often end up conflated, and the truth can get muddled. In this list, we will be exploring 10 stubborn myths about World War II that just won't go away. One of the most enduring myths about World War II is that the United States sat out the war until, peaceful and kind, they were caught with their pants down at Pearl Harbor and decided to join up to help stop the Axis powers. Now, while it is true that Pearl Harbor was the catalyst that gave the United States Congress and Senate the guts to officially join, it's not like the Americans were sitting on their hands before that. To start with, Japan did not just attack the United States out of nowhere like a man getting mugged in a meadow, even if that's how history books make it sound. The fact is, the United States was engaged in a very ugly diplomatic war with Japan over its aggressive expansion, and war was almost inevitable. As for America's war against the other Axis powers, America had actually been helping the British for years and had ramped up that help over the previous year. This meant an attack from someone in the Axis was almost certainly coming soon, and with it, the official declarations of war. Many shocking World War II documentaries or other specials will go to great lengths to paint the Nazis as some kind of almost mythical beast. However, the truth is that they were human beings, but not only that, they were human beings who lost. We can theorize until the end of days about what might have happened if they won, but they did not and were almost certainly never going to win the war. They overextended themselves from the very beginning, and the idea they were close to developing a nuclear weapon is simply not true. What is true is that they did succeed in making heavy water, but it really wasn't that much, and especially not for what they would have needed it for. This is also a terrible method for trying to make nuclear technology, as it just isn't efficient. It shows their nuclear ambition was really in its infancy compared to the United States. Some people will point to all the Nazi scientists the USA grabbed up after the war that were especially good at rocket technology, but they were needed for different things. The US didn't need help making atomic bombs. They had already slaughtered hundreds of thousands with just 2 of them. Many people, when talking about the atomic bomb, will try to mention the bombings of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a necessary evil. They will say that destroying 2 populated cities with hundreds of thousands of people living in them saved Japan from total destruction. The Japanese are talked about in this weird fashion as if they are some kind of alien hive mind that would have unreasonably fought to the last man. This makes it easier for the largest country in the world, in military terms at least, to sleep peacefully at night without being haunted by its past. However, this justification is nothing more than a bunch of hot air dreamed up by a country that doesn't want to feel guilty for annihilating hundreds of thousands when it wasn't needed at all. The fact of the matter is that the US had already bombed the living hell out of Japan, so the idea that bombing more of their cities would make them surrender is just silly. America firebombed Tokyo and bombed civilian cities all over Japan as part of a campaign to wear down the nation's spirit, and they kept fighting. Many scholars now believe the real reason Japan ended the war is simple. Stalin was about to enter the fray, and Japan did not want the Soviets as their conquerors, nor felt they could keep up with the war on 2 fronts. Plenty of Americans like to think of World War II as the time the country truly united, and the whole world came together to fight off evil. World War II has certainly inspired countless fictional franchises, along with more documentaries than you can count. These stories tend to play up the idea that everyone was volunteering to go fight the bad guys. And unlike when politics usually divides people, everyone was completely in this thing together. However, the sad thing is that even the greatest world war of all time didn't actually bring America truly together. There were organizations in the United States that supported the Nazis, and while they were investigated for their un-American activities, the USA has a lot of freedom of speech, so people could get away with a lot as long as it was peaceful. It might then surprise you to find out that in the US, during World War II, there were marches in support of the Nazi Party, some of them in broad daylight. As for the US being the heroes who saved everyone, well, they almost weren't at all. Isolationists tried super hard to stop the country from getting into the war and disapproved greatly of President Franklin Roosevelt's shadow war against the Axis powers. The isolationists in Congress thought the country could just sit things out, and they were not easy to convince. Some talk about the Blitzkrieg or Lightning War in awed voices, as if it was some special advancement in warfare or a genius trick used by Hitler and the Nazis. This misconception has helped create a mystique, and some still think if the Nazis had more equipment and the right bit of this and that, the sort of genius they had could have taken over the whole world. However, the truth is that the Blitzkrieg wasn't that clever. This war strategy was not exactly new, nor was it even invented by the Nazis. In fact, all it really means is that it is the opposite of trench warfare, in that you are trying to get a knockout blow on the enemy. The Blitzkrieg is just the war equivalent of a sucker punch, a preemptive strike, which is just a dirty trick and not anything clever at all. The Soviets found that this strategy was easily beaten by putting down multiple defensive lines to slow down the enemy. By doing this, they could take advantage of the fact that the Blitzkrieg caused the Nazis to temporarily separate some of their lighter and heavier forces, leaving their flanks vulnerable. One of the favorite myths about World War II is that regular German citizens did nothing at all, and that if we just speak up in our own countries, we can make sure nothing like that ever happens again. And while it's a comfortable notion that people being responsible would have stopped it, things aren't always that easy. The Nazis started with propaganda and then followed it up by slowly ramping up terrible and abusive laws. People who spoke out against them to protect their neighbors were taken into camps themselves, and everyone was afraid. And we aren't saying that German people gave up once Hitler had solidified power either. Many German citizens did try to help those under threat from the Nazis to get to safety. Some German officials stuck out their necks, knowing the punishment for one of their kind would be terrible to get people to safety. Now, we aren't saying that there weren't some bad citizens as well, since some did report on their neighbors, but there were also many good people who did as much as they could. It's arguable just how much control Germany had over France throughout the war, but some people are confused about how that control actually began. The Germans first occupied France about halfway through the year, in 1940. At first, they just had the northern and western portions of the country, and many felt that the Vichy government was a puppet state run by the Nazis. The French resistance began almost immediately, and it took the Nazis 2 more years to control the rest of France. And even when they had this, it wasn't like they had successfully conquered anything. You see, the French were a really hard people to take over, and they didn't take kindly to invaders on their land. The French resistance was so fierce that to say the Germans had the country would be a gigantic overstatement of their accomplishment. Without an incredibly expensive sustained occupation, it is unlikely Germany could have ever held the territory long term. With how strong the insurgency was, the Germans had about as much control over France as the United States had over Iraq. Keep calm and carry on has become, in many people's minds, the very perfect celebration of British stiff upper lippedness. It perfectly defines their people and shows how they managed to stay calm during the worst of World War II, by remembering to stay cool and go about their business no matter what. Or at least it would have been if they had ever actually needed to use this slogan during the war. The truth is that the slogan wasn't dredged up until decades later, and it has some interesting history behind it. By then, things were very, very frightening, and no one really knew what was going to happen. It was World War II, after all. The Nazis invading Britain and at least temporarily occupying it was a very real possibility, and something that the government had to be prepared for, even if it was unthinkable. The slogans and posters were printed up as part of a just-in-case shadow campaign to keep people's spirits up if the country were actually to be invaded. Of course, as we know, the British won the Battle of Britain, keeping any invasion at bay, and the campaign was never needed. But it serves as a stark reminder of just how close things were to very different and much darker outcomes. One of the favorite subjects of World War II documentaries is the fate of the Nazis, especially those who were not captured and put on trial at Nuremberg. They like to wax on about how some of them may have escaped to South America, and of course the infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele is always mentioned. However, the favorite is Hitler, and the theories about him surviving somehow persist. Still, while the theories may stubbornly refuse to die, Hitler himself most definitely did. For starters, Allied intelligence told us he had gone to hide in his Führer bunker, and he was discovered with Eva Braun, the closest thing he had to a girlfriend. The Allied forces found the Führer bunker stocked with supplies, which confirmed it was almost certainly his personal bunker. And it was also stocked with what was definitely Hitler's dead body. Now, some may argue that it could have been a body double, but the dental records were confirmed to be a match with Hitler's. At the time, there was no better way of identifying a body, and there was zero reason to believe it was anyone else but him in the bunker. Now, we want to be clear that we are not trying to downplay the incredible heroism involved or the incredible amount of planning required to pull off the operation of D-Day. It was a miracle of planning, subterfuge, and so much heroism that will never be forgotten. However, despite all of that, the operation came closer to disaster than most people are aware of. The truth is that it was quite a defensible position, and a huge part of the Allies' victory relied on tricking Hitler, which had required months of careful work to ensure Hitler could believe that Normandy was not the main attack, and not even be sure of the day or the time of the real attack. While losing the battle and not taking the beach would not necessarily have lost the war, it would have been a giant setback for the Allies, and if Hitler hadn't been successfully fooled, it may not have succeeded at all. Several of Hitler's best commanders were not available on the day of the attack, and the intelligence operation the Allies had put together managed to make him think a bigger attack was still coming elsewhere. He resisted calls from his commanders to bring in more heavy artillery and tanks, which might have stopped the Allies from storming the beach. Well, I certainly hope you found this video to be entertaining and informative. If you have thoughts, be sure to comment down below and keep it tuned here for more content just like this. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.